Hello, and welcome to Calling for Change, presented by Lincoln Calling and Civic, Nebraska. My name is Erin Poor of Lincoln Calling, and I'm joined by Brad Christian-Sallis, our partner from Civic, Nebraska. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Good. How about you?
Good. So good to see you again.
Good seeing you
Today,
too.
we're in for a really good conversation. We are excited to be talking about rights for incarcerated people. Brad, as ever, is going to be playing part host, part expert. And we're also very excited to welcome in Dominique Morgan as our special guest. Dominique Morgan is a musician, a designer, an advocate, a speaker, and the visionary behind the national organization Black and Pink. Dominique, welcome to Calling for Change.
Thank you all for having me. I'm
Of
so excited
course.
to be here tonight.
We're so excited to have you. We're going to talk more about Black and Pink more in depth throughout the entirety of the show, but I was wondering if you could just give us a quick overview. What is that organization? What's some of the work that you all do?
So on the surface, people look at Black and Pink as an abolitionist organization, which we very much are steeped, founded, and live in our abolitionist values as an agency. But I think what I've grown to really see, and a way for everyone to feel like they can digest what Black and Pink does. We look at the systems that harm people who identify as LGBTQ plus or who identify as living with HIV and AIDS, who are system impacted. And we use the term system impacted to take the conversation past incarceration or post incarceration. How have you been impacted by these systems of oppression that will coalesce to then position you to experience the carceral state? We do the work to dismantle those systems, and then we do the work to engage in solidarity measures that support those individuals who are impacted in visioning what their liberation looks like. And then our hope is that we are then supporting them, engaging with them, walking the journey with them to access their version of liberation.
Great. Thank you. We're really excited to learn more about that throughout our conversation. Brad, you also work a lot in this field for rights for incarcerated people, rights for folks with felonies. Tell us a little bit more about your work in this sphere.
My focus has been through my role at Civic, Nebraska, where I'm voting rights field director. And really, it's been focused on restoring that right to vote. Right now, there's the 2-year waiting period where anyone who has been incarcerated with a felony has to wait 2 years till they're finished with their sentence, probation, and parole before they can vote. But I mean, the right to vote is something that's so essential, and it's something that should never be taken away for anyone. So that's kind of what I bring to it, that role. Work on the policy, and then doing a lot of education within our different prisons here in Nebraska, trying to let people know that it's no longer that lifetime ban like it was in the past. And after 2 years, they are going to be able to vote.
So I've heard you talk a little bit about this shift from a lifetime ban to the 2-year ban. Can you tell us a little bit about that history? And maybe even if you know the history of that advocacy that went into the changing of that policy.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the history. Dominique, you might know a little bit more than me with it, but my understanding is it changed in, I believe it was 2005, and prior to that, it had been a lifetime ban. And we know that lifetime ban kind of comes from our history as a state and the history of racism in Nebraska, that we never wanted Black folks voting. And one of the ways to prevent Black people from voting was we can just give Black people felonies. And so that was written into the law. If you have a felony, you won't be able to vote. And it was a lifetime ban. Then there was an effort to remove that lifetime ban, but it really wasn't completed. And it was shortened to 2 years after the end of your probation and parole, which is way too long, and it's something that should never be taken away, especially when we just know that history and know it comes from a place of trying to keep Black people out of our democracy and stop us from participating.
I think for me, it's interesting to recognize that this isn't a national standard. This is what Nebraska is choosing to do. There are places in the United States where people who are in jail are voting while they're in jail. There are places in this country where where people are in prison, they're able to vote. The 2 years was a compromise. So many people rave about our Unicam, and I think one of the biggest casualties is that it takes so much of the across the aisle work for things to push through that oftentimes those who we're trying to improve their lived experience through these policies, through these initiatives, the outcome is so watered down. We wonder, is it still valuable? Because someone could have left when we had the lifetime ban. You could have left Nebraska and been able to vote and registered in another state. So it's hard for me to see that as a win, knowing the concessions that had to be made. I will also say that for the folks who are like, well, people need to be paying taxes, all these other things, people who are incarcerated in the state of Nebraska, if you're making an hourly wage, which many of them are in working in the shops and working in the Cornhusker State industries and things of that nature, they're not only paying rent for a sale, they're paying taxes out of the funds they make. They're paying their child support. So they're engaging civically on the financial side. And we have a society where we're telling them, but we're going to prevent you from using your voice to mitigate what sort of society we're going to have in this state. Even if you are incarcerated, you have children in the community, you have parents and loved ones in the community. The silencing of voices for system impacted people is for lack of a better word, a crime in this state. And you just saw as recent as last week where the parole eligibility a policy that went through, Pete Ricketts then vetoed that. And so it's really hard and it's really disheartening to think about how, as Brad said, all of this is based in the seeds of racism, of oppression, and preventing people from coming together to really create the type of change that'll make their lived experience better.
Yeah, and along those lines with felonies, not every felony is something where someone even goes to jail. So you have people who never serve any time and they also lose that right to vote. So it's the idea that we don't want people who are impacted by systems playing a role in shaping those systems. It's ridiculous. I wish it was a crime. I love that you said that, and hopefully we can get to the point where it is a crime for us to be taking people out of our democracy the way that's happening right now.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you both, what is the state of that advocacy? Brad, I've heard you talk about that 2-year waiting period and your work towards trying to get that taken out altogether. So what's the state of that advocacy right now here in Nebraska?
I think it's something we're working on and we should all be working on. It's I believe it was 2017, the bill to get rid of the 2-year waiting period was introduced by Senator Justin Wayne, and it passed through our legislature and it was vetoed by the governor. And that's kind of the furthest it's been since then. So I think it's really up to everybody watching this video and all of us to continue that work to make sure we're not just talking about getting rid of the 2-year waiting period, but really moving forward to make sure we're getting to the point where we're just never taking people's right to vote away.
I would even say, because I feel like it's constantly a battle of what can we really win? What can we really get? And for certain senators and certain movement leaders, compromises are being made because that's just how the game is, right? As an executive director of a nonprofit agency, it doesn't matter how radical Black and Pink is, we are still working in the nonprofit industrial complex. Every day, I am holding myself to my values, to our organizational values, but I also know that there are times that I'm put in multiple positions where I have to make compromises just to keep my organization funded, or to make sure that my staff has what they need, or to be able to get resources to the people I serve. So I say that compromise piece, not from a space of judgment, but just of just the reality of it. And I don't think on a macro scale, changing policies that improve the lived experience for formerly and currently incarcerated people in the state of Nebraska is a high priority, unless we creep up on the deadline for them to reduce the prison population, unless we're talking about making sure that, you know, corporals and officers are getting their raises. But at a structural level, saying we need to create the sort of society where everyone, no matter of your status, gets to envision what liberation looks like and gets to touch it. I think it's also it's unfair and disgusting to tell someone to complete their prison sentence and then you add on another level of incarceration to their access. And that's why I don't use the term felon. I don't call myself a felon, and I would never allow anyone to call me a felon again. And I don't refer to others as felon. I don't police how folks refer to themselves. But that's important to me because there's no past tense to felon. And I feel like that perpetuates the system, the carceral state that we have of, oh, we tell you, okay, if you get sentenced to 2 or 3 years in jail, that once you do that, you get to come back to your life. We know that's not true. I asked the 3 of you all on this call, how many people do you know who have been incarcerated that sit in a current space of access and success right now? And if you can think of people, how many of them are Black? How many of them identify as LGBTQ+? How many of them identify as trans? So in a state where our prison population is close to over 200%, you know, I know it's over like 300% over capacity. Can you explain to me how there's not 10 Dominique Morgans lined up? Right? And not that voting is the key to that, but engaging in your power is essential to understanding how you thrive in this world, right? The choice, right? That's what we're talking about. And prison inherently robs you of your autonomy just based in the law that we don't own ourselves. Senator Wayne, that legislation around the word slavery was looking at the 13th Amendment and how they're able to mistreat and engage in prison labor for people who are incarcerated. How do you remove someone from their autonomy for 10, 15, 20 years, and then you release them, and then you magically expect them to understand how to wield the world in their own will? And then you take it the next step. You expect them to understand policy, to track senators, all these things that some of the most privileged folks in our community struggle with, to then weaponize your power to vote. Like, it's a spectrum of removal of power and removal of self that the carceral state does. And people feeling like they can't engage in voting, being disenchanted from that form of civic engagement is just one of the byproducts of that.
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk too, what both of you are bringing up is that there are so many things that are taken from system impacted people. And as we think about what we're advocating for, not only in this moment of national uprising and global uprising, but into the future as well. But maybe you could share with us a little bit more about what are some of the issues that we do need to be organizing around and advocating around. What are other rights that are taken from system impacted people that we need to be shouting about?
I mean, I'm gonna keep it at the intersection of voting because that's the topic I love, and I use love as in I enjoy being able to show people how insidious the carceral state is. And because there's so many folks who are like, well, my work doesn't really affect prison. No, I can show anyone. Tell me what you do, and I can show you how what you do can be affected and can affect the carceral state. But just the piece of like, right, so we're all trying to go to this place where we are getting mail-in ballots. So people are not exposed and being in lines and all those things. Well, depending on your charge, you can't get an address. Depending on your charge, you can't get an apartment and get a home. You may be living in a shelter in perpetuity. Like, you may never be able to establish yourself depending on your credit history. I am 38 years old. I make a good amount of money a year, and I still can't. The house I live in right now is because a friend was moving. I've been out of prison for 11 years. I run a national agency, right? I couldn't just walk into those new condos that they have in Benson and apply, because I'm not going to pass the background. And that's with all the privilege I have. That's with all the reach I have. So even to find a home, to transportation, to that autonomy piece, people underestimate how much mental fortitude it takes to understand that your choice has power, to believe it, to sit in it. And when you've navigated systems that have slowly trained you to think that's not a truth, it's very hard to step into that again, right? So there's a multitude of charges. There are systems. Again, as an abolitionist, I don't believe in incarceration. So that's my belief. I'm not here to put my beliefs on anyone else, but I'm saying that I don't have the right to create a hierarchy of who gets second chances and who doesn't. And I don't believe that I have the right for my healing, that it takes someone to be incarcerated for my healing to take place. Those are my beliefs. And it's taken me a long time to get there, as a person who was incarcerated myself, as a person who experienced sexual harm as a child and in corrections by a corrections employee, to get to the point where I disavowed myself from that as an option. It took a lot of work, but now I'm able to look at and understand that the sex offense registry, it was just 2 months ago where a person on the sex offense registry in Nebraska was hunted down and shot in broad daylight because their information is out there, right? We are building systems to create safety, but I don't see anyone feeling as if the safety is coming to fruition. And even what Brad said earlier, I don't know how many times I'm like, oh my God, we should just create a law to stop this law. And then I have to stop myself then in my tracks and say, no matter what law they create, it's not going to live on my body the way it lives on your body, Aaron. Mm-hmm. And so then it's like, even the remedies to the harm that's happening in our communities, you're afraid to try to weaponize them because they're not going to be a balm to your needs the way they are to someone who has greater access to privilege than you. So when we look at like charges, like that's super nuanced. But if you look at the spectrum of incarceration as experienced in Nebraska, from employment to housing to getting government assistance, to getting custody of your children, to visiting your children, to voting, it's muck and mire. And if you don't have advocates or people to work with you, like a Brad, like, Jasmine Harris and Precious McKesson and folks like that, then you get lost in it. The last thing I'll say is, the day I was released from prison after a decade of being in the prison, they gave me a sheet of places I could go to apply. And I had a $100 check after 10 years. And I spent $30 getting a new ID. I spent about $10 for a ride to just the first place they sent me to apply for a job. And I got there and the building was closed. And I remember sitting there thinking, why am I doing this? This isn't going to work. This isn't meant for me. By the grace of, in my belief, by the grace of God, I had a mother and family that were able to talk me down. But every day people sit in that space of, why am I trying? And no one's there to say, you're trying because you deserve it. You're trying because you're worthy of it. You're trying because you want to be better. How can I help that? How can I help that come to be?
Yes. And Dominique, going a little bit further and thinking too about the work that Black and Pink is doing, can you talk to us a little bit more about the specific violence that the carceral state does to our LGBTQ community?
So one of the biggest measures that I talk to folks about, because it not only is in the adult system, it's now being used in the youth system, is something called the Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA. And PREA was established, I think 2002, 2003 was when it was first rolled out. I was at the Omaha Correctional Center here in Omaha, Nebraska, when the PREA standards were first released. And I remember being called to the front of the building, and this woman asking me, it was about 3 to 4 questions. And after that, I would be identified as either a potential victim or a potential predator based on these questions. And then that outcome would dictate where I could work in the prison, who I could live with, what programming I could have access to. Therefore, it could impact my release. PREA also exists if a person is on parole, because so many people are like, well, you're parole, you're free. No, you're leased out. Just like slavery, it's no different than the slave practices. We're leasing you to freedom. We can pull you back from freedom at any time. And our mandates, our rules still are over your life. And so PREA is a huge one. It was the roots of it is still very much based in white supremacy. It was this idea that white young folks were going inside of these prisons and Black men were turning them out, making them gay. And so PREA was meant, because it was a bipartisan federal mandate. It was meant to protect people who could be impacted by sexual harm, and even further be precognizant of whether you could be harmed or whether you would cause harm. Now let's talk about how dangerous it is for a human being to create some sort of scoring system to predetermine if you'll harm somebody or if you're going to be harmed, and then institute practices based on this pre-belief. Not anything that is in front of them, but based on 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, this is what's going to happen to you. So we're going to do this and this and this. They went to my cell and they found a birthday card from a friend from the yard, and they used that as a reason to put us both in segregation. I was then taken from Omaha Correctional Center to Nebraska State Prison, put in South 40. And South 40 is the facility that was the original jail. And this was back in 2004 when there was no air, there was no heating down there. And then I was taken from South 40 at NSP to the Supermax Special Management Unit in Tecumseh State Prison. I was 22. I had a nonviolent charge, and I was being placed in administrative confinement for my safety. That's what happened. I spent 18 months in a cell by myself under PREA. And had it not been for the ACLU of Nebraska, Amy Miller and Brenda Council, I don't know if I would be still standing today. That was my own lived experience. Now, having been positioned to been able to challenge the PREA Resource Center, I was in the room and challenged them on the juvenile transgender policy that they released at the top of 2019. Doing work all across the country addressing PREA. Almost 20 years later, people are still experiencing the same harm. And it's preventing people from sharing when they are being sexually harmed. It's preventing people from sharing when they have any fears. It's positioning historically Black men, Black folks, to be categorized as potential predators, regardless of any of their behaviors. And these things continue to live into society, right? That's huge. And no one talks about PREA in the way they should. It's a local issue and it's a federal issue. So when we're looking at voting, and you want to look at who you want in that White House, we need to think about who really is going to give a damn about mitigating that harm that PREA has caused. And that wasn't a Republican or Democrat. That was folks decided that was the best thing. It's really dangerous when those who are not directly impacted feel like they can walk in a room and come up with a solution for those who are impacted, because it usually isn't going to work out the way you think it is. The other barrier are these registries that queer people, I believe, are inherently seen as sexually deviant, right? And because of the erasure of comprehensive sex education in our schools, most folks, even the most learned people can't talk about sexual orientation, gender identity, and presentation as three different things, which they are. And so as a trans person myself, who is only attracted to cisgender men, right? Couldn't even comprehend that, yes, my gender is trans, but my orientation based on the standards we have in our society is that I would be categorized as straight. Now that's a societal standard, right? But because people fall in the LGBTQ plus spectrum, they inherently see folks as sexually deviant. And post release is very difficult when we're talking about getting a place to parole to. Halfway houses in this state are difficult to get queer people into. Very difficult. Now the HUD has released standards for shelters to be able to identify trans people in order to be able to put them out of shelters. So when historically I could get someone paroled from work release or the state prison to at least a shelter until I could get them housing, I can't do that anymore. And so a system that's already very dangerous and harmful is that much more dangerous and harmful for LGBTQ plus people. And we are, how can I explain this? I feel like it's like being in a room of like 10 people screaming and everybody's screaming. How do you decide which scream you're going to listen to first? And so, yes, so I give that kind of visual because I know that as a society, we all are navigating something right now. Whether it's cisgender Black folks, Black men, cisgender Black women, women in general, white, non-Black identifying queer people, non-Black identifying trans people. Like, yes, the oppression is there. And we're all saying, like, look at what the world is doing to us. But I challenge people to look at I've said this 5 times a day at least. If we are creating policies and spaces where the most oppressed are positioned to thrive, everyone else is inherently going to be able to thrive as well. And so when we look at how these systems affect queer folks, Aaron, it's that and so much more. So at Black and Pink, I came from a public health background. Before I was over at Black and Pink, I was an adolescent health educator at Charles Drew Health Center. And it really benefited me looking at how if we can affect health disparities, that we can position people to, there's a greater chance of people being successful post-incarceration. And so that's how I approached my time as an ED. We created Transitions, which was financially supporting trans and queer folks into getting housing. Then I said, oh my goodness, we're investing all this money in these apartments and we don't know whose pocket we're putting this money in. We need to create our own living space. So then Lighthouse was birthed. February 11th of this year, the 11-year anniversary of me being released from prison, myself, Jason Leiden, the founder of Black and Pink, Mayor Gene Stothard, Ben Gray, and a multitude of other folks, Megan Hunt, we stood on the steps of Lighthouse and we cut that ribbon. So we're trying to build an ecosystem within Black and Pink that mitigates the harm. But times like this with you all, I want to explain and challenge you all to dig into the roots and the grayness in harm to really be able to suss out how frightening the lived experience of incarceration can be for LGBTQ plus folks, not only in our country, but in Nebraska. Because as Nebraskans, we love to like say, okay, that happens in a big city. That doesn't happen here. Oh, that happens that may happen in California. That doesn't happen in Nebraska. In Nebraska, you live in a state where the prison population is over 300% overpopulation. And it's been that way. We've been overpopulated in our state system for nearly 20 years. You live in a state that has the highest paid corrections director in the country and the most disastrous system per capita. I know people are like, well, there's not murders, there's not these things happening. This is Nebraska. We should be able to address this, but for some reason, these numbers continue to grow. And for queer and LGBTQ plus people who identify as living with HIV and AIDS, the crack that we already put system impacted people in, they fall in the crevices of that crack.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that vital information, Dominique. This is a conversation that, just like you said, it is never really given the light of day that it really deserves, which is why we thank you for all of the work and advocacy that you do on behalf of Black and Pink, on behalf of queer and trans incarcerated people. I mean, thank you. And I want to go a little bit further. You started speaking a bit about some of the things that Black and Pink is doing for system impacted people. And something that I was really admiring is the ways in which Black and Pink constructs communities of care around system impacted people. And so I want, and Brad, feel free to jump in with this one too. Maybe both of you could speak to the ways in which communities of care are constructed around incarcerated people. What do those look like? What has Black and Pink done? And what have you seen elsewhere in the world or in the country that is really striving to specifically care for incarcerated folks as well as queer incarcerated folks?
I will quickly say that the thing that's funny to me is that it's what we did on the inside, except on a larger scale. I was with Jasmine Tasaki as our new director of advocacy. She was here for her onboarding last week from Memphis, Tennessee. And we were sitting there eating lobster and drinking wine. And I remember she needed something and I just handed it to her. And we kind of instinctively went to share something. And we laughed because we would do the same thing with a 40-cent ramen noodle soup inside the prison. The community of care is necessary because if we don't do it, people will not care about us. People will be okay with us dying. People will be okay with us not thriving. And so early on, we had to figure out, for folks who watch, Aaron is talking about a theory of change, right? That's in activist circles. For folks who are like, what are communities? What's that? For people who watch Pose, that's what houses are for. Right? You had all of these folks who are impacted, who are navigating some sort of barrier. And they're like, listen, if 6 of us come together and 6 of us have $5, then we have $30, honestly. And then we can build on that. It's this idea that if we come together and we engage in mutual aid and we are making sure that if I have it, you have it, and understanding that what I have is even that much more valuable because you have it as well. We build kind of these systems of that. But it really comes from, for me, that's how I was in prison. It was at one time, it was maybe like 3 or 4 trans girls in there, and they wouldn't let us get jobs. They wouldn't let us. So we were braiding hair, we were ironing clothes, we were running errands for the cards tables to put money together. And then we would figure out how we ate. I was the first one to get a job working in the kitchen. So then it was, okay, yeah, I make $50 a month, but really that's $50 for me and my sisters. We all have hygiene products. We all are able to buy panties and bras and all these things. Like, that's what it was. At Black and Pink, we just do it on a larger scale. We've dispersed nearly $60,000 in COVID response funding across the country. I want to also note that Black and Pink, I moved the offices here in March of 2018, but Black and Pink is a national agency. So Omaha is in position to really address and impact the work on a national scale through Black and Pink being here in Omaha. Lighting House is about mutual aid. Yo, let's come in here. Let's cook together. Let's make a list of food together. Let's build community. And the last thing that I'll say to create space for Brad, thank you all for allowing me to kind of share some of this stuff ad nauseum, is that I was blessed to have access to a lot of community resources. But the best community resource that was allocated to me was community. Community itself. And we underestimate how difficult it is to walk in a room and people want to be drawn to you. That takes skill. It takes skill to be able to understand how you fit into your world, into a society. And the more that I became connected to my community, the more the world out here mattered to me. There are days that I don't want to get out of bed, not because I'm depressed, it's because I don't have it in me. And it's my tie to community. It's my responsibility and my accountability to my community that makes me figure out, okay, Dominique, get it together, right? So outside of all the other programmatic things we offer, we want to help people build community outside of Black and Pink folks. There are times at Lightning House where we just have people over. We put out chicken and let's just sit around and let's talk. And people from the community to come. Because you need to know Brad. You need to know Aaron. And outside of a Dominique, let me connect you. Y'all should be a part of their community. Because then they can say, oh, I have a question about voting. I don't need to ask Dominique. I can message Brad directly. There's power in that. All of us have been in a position where someone's been like, you know what, I'm going to put you on. And they take us in the room, but they want us to be in the room based on the way that they want us to be in the room. We all have also hopefully been given access to power through someone else, and the person got the hell out of the way and let us do what we had to do. It hit different. And so, again, outside of all the other programs we offer, breaking down the walls of I've been incarcerated, I've never been incarcerated, is one of our biggest things, because when you have community, you recognize that people care. And there's a humanity that's sparked in that. And I think prison, I know prison, experiencing prison will constantly put out your fire and your light of your humanity. And so people, being connected to people, ignites it and keeps it going.
Definitely. And that's one of the things I've noticed when I have gone and done the reentry fairs, and we're talking about voting and voting rights, and there's people in there who aren't getting out ever, but that responsibility to the community as a whole, that, okay, can I have 5 of these? Can I have 6 of these handouts? So that I can educate everyone else I know and everyone else who I know who is getting out, so that they are able to vote and make a difference. That's something that's always been mind-blowing to me, is that I do a lot of tabling and I never see the level of engagement and caring about not only like your own rights, but other people's rights and the rest of your community's rights that I see when I visited the prisons. Everyone in there is so dedicated to making sure that everyone else knows about this information, especially if they didn't know before. When there's people who come and they say, I'm never going to be able to vote, and then they realize it's only that 2 years, then it's always, yeah, how many of these can I get? Can you come back to talk to this group I have or that group I have, so that everyone can know this? And I wish I got that same reaction when I wasn't in prisons. But I think that's really what it comes down to, is that just feeling responsibility for like the rest of your community beyond just yourself or your family, but just, no, this is my community. I care. I'm going to take that responsibility upon myself to help them, even though I'm not gaining anything. I may never be able to vote myself, but it's going to help people who are in my community.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you all have spoken about so many important issues, and I'm so grateful for that. And I want to kind of think about folks who are listening to this entire series of Calling for Change, who are really trying to find those channels where they can exercise their advocacy muscles. So maybe I could ask both of you to just kind of boil down, what are some of the most important issues facing system impacted people today? And how should folks be advocating on behalf of that community, our community?
I think the largest ones that are barriers to get them to like the other issues. I had a great time with the League of Women Voters earlier today at a panel with 2 other Black trans women, and talking about like civic engagement, it's not that people don't want to engage civically, it's that they have other things on their plate that take up space that will prevent them from engaging that way. So when it comes to housing, we really need to do a better job to make sure that people who want to have a home should be able to have a home. People who want to work should be able to work. People who want to have better should be able to have better. And there's so many things that are happening around that. The other piece I talk about often is that, so I know we had like kind of the renters rights that went through our city council, but do people know that when you are released, if you paroled, or even if you're living at a halfway house, that you're not a tenant, that you're a program participant? You're paying $500-600 a month to share a room with 3 to 4 people, and you have no rights. One of the big things that I really want to talk about, especially around this next the next mayoral race, is how can we make sure that people who are system impacted, who are seeking housing, have rights regardless of what the status is in the housing, because that's very dangerous to me. Employment and I know we have a LGBT non-discrimination policy here in Omaha, and I think Lincoln does now as well. But this ban the box piece has to go past banning the box. We have to make the box not a non-factor. We have to make the box a non-factor. You want to work? You want to put in the time so that you can contribute to our society and take care of your people? You should be able to do that. The third piece I think is around access to healthcare and really supporting people in getting access to like those sort of services. Nebraska AIDS Project does an amazing job of that. Federally qualified health centers like Charles Drew Health Center and One World definitely step up, but we need that on a higher scale. That incubation and connection for people who are coming out of incarceration to get them directly in health services, whether it's behavioral health services, whether it's, again, health services around immunocompromisation. It doesn't matter what it is, because I've also seen that be a huge barrier, is that someone can be really successful in the prison system. When you're released from prison, no matter what your medication is, no matter how essential the medication is, you're released with 2 weeks of those medications. So you could identify as bipolar, you could be experiencing depression, HIV and AIDS meds. You might be privileged enough to be on hormone replacement therapy inside of a prison. You get 2 weeks of that upon release. And one of the biggest barriers I'll see is if I can't get someone directly into care, it'll be a struggle for that to happen. And them falling out of care is then kind of a road for them to recidivate. So healthcare, housing, and employment barriers. If we can have better conversations about what does it mean to make those like wide open lanes for opportunity for people, because I want to challenge anyone watching this and saying, no one wakes up and says, I don't want to be my greatest self today. No one wakes up believing that. What happens is you wake up and you're like, I want to be my greatest self. And you walk out the door and the world puts all of these roadblocks in front of you. And then you say, you know what? I just can't do it today. Now, we hope that they just take the day off and try it again tomorrow. But some folks, that doesn't happen. And for the people saying, well, that you just don't want it enough. I've wanted to be great my whole life. I've wanted to be incredible my whole life. It's been the last 11 years where I saw the road to that. It's been the last 11 years where people removed debris and roadblocks off the road for me to continue to get it. Because I didn't get here alone. I don't want to be the anomaly anymore. So please believe that people want to be great. People want to be in community. People want to be their best self. We as a society have to do a better job at helping them achieve that and reach it. And oftentimes that means dismantling a lot of the barriers that sometimes benefit us. Because we also have a society built on this thing where this scarcity complex. many of us are going to have to really have a belief and sit in that there's enough for all of us. That if Aaron gets her benefits, whatever that is, that it doesn't inherently mean I'm not going to get mine. And that's another. It's not an issue, but it's one of the tactics I've seen perpetuated that prevents us from coming together, that then prevents us from really addressing these larger systemic issues.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dominique, for boiling it down like that. Brad, same question. What do you feel are the most important issues?
So going off what Dominique said, one of the things that I would say anybody watching can do is take the time to educate people about voting rights, but specifically because I know we talked about housing here and how it can be hard for people who are formerly incarcerated to find that housing, to let people know that when it comes to voting, particularly with vote by mail, but with any type of voting, that people, you can register and have the address you register at as your local election commissioner or county clerk, so that you don't need a permanent address to have an apartment or to have a house to register to vote. And you can also, with your vote by mail, once you're registered, have it sent to wherever the location is, whether or not you're on the lease or anything like that. So I think a lot of us would probably assume like, oh, I don't know about anybody who that information would be useful for. But I think if you were to post it on Facebook or just text to like the first 50 people in your phone or on your Instagram, there's going to be somebody there who that information will be useful for, and it'll probably make their day and kind of help them along that path, like Dominique said, of being their greatest self, because there's not very many people who get information like that and are like, oh man, especially when something's been taken away from you. We like when we have things taken away, everybody, we want them back. So if somebody's struggling with that and having a permanent place to live and they want to participate in this election, that's something you can do. That's some information you can spread that's going to help people out and help them be able to participate.
Absolutely. I really like that suggestion, Brad. And both of you have done beautiful jobs in framing these issues that are extremely important. And I want to kind of think about folks who both have been doing this work for a long time and advocating for system impacted people and creating communities of care around people who are impacted by systems. But I also want to think about folks who are just now coming to this realization of the vast, innumerable injustices. What can you say to folks who are just waking up to the injustices of the carceral state, who want to show up as advocates and want to be there as community, but maybe they're new to this space? So what could you say to them, folks who are new here?
I would say to listen to Dominique.
I think really know why you're here. I think, one of my biggest fears has been like activism is trendy and it's mainstream conversations, and you're seeing people talk about abolition on the cover of the New York Times and all of these things, which is awesome to see this work amplified. But it's always a concern, like, is it going to be watered down? Is it going to lose its integrity? Is it going to lose its bite? And then at the same time, I just have to have a belief and invest in grace that what is happening is what needs to be happening. But really understand why you're in this. Understand why you want to be in community with folks. Understand who you are as an advocate. I think it's great to see something happen and be amped up by it. But amped up always dissipates. In this work, there are days when you're just like, woo, do I just go get a corporate job and just find some place where I clock in, and when I clock out, I don't ever think about the work, and no one's inboxing me on my Facebook, on my Instagram, on my Twitter. They found my secret Twitter to ask me about, doing bail support. Like, do I want to leave that world? There are just days when I'm just overcome. And because I really challenge myself on what's my why, and I know that sounds very Brene Brown, but it's true, because if you understand why you're in it, you understand why you stay in it, and you'll understand when it's time for you to get out of it. I think these things can be lifelong values you have, but I honestly don't think it's healthy for someone to be a lifelong advocate. When I look at Miss Brenda Council or Mr. Chambers, it's like, to be 70 years old and giving the community 50 or 60 years, I then ask myself, well, how much time did you give to yourself? And especially when you're a directly impacted person advocating, I know that I don't want to spend the next 20 years doing this work on this level, because I want to work on me on a high level. So that why piece helps me stay there. But it also helps me understand what my advocacy brand is. It's not bad to use that language, because that means that your brand just means people know how you show up. And for me, that's how you build community, because I've been around Brad. I think I've been in the same room with Brad 6 times, maybe. 6 times, but I know what his brand of work is. Brad is going to get it done. Brad could be in the room and you not hear him. He may not speak, right? There's just something about him, and I know that, one, because of how I've been around him and how other people talk about him. That's an advocacy brand, and it's important when we're building community, because it helps us understand who's safe and who's not safe. It helps us be aware about who we want to. Because when you go into initiatives together, we're really investing in each other. It helps you feel more comfortable about that move, about that decision. So really be clear about who you are in the work. Are you like, you know what? I am not the person that goes out to the march. I'm the person that goes and gets the bottles of water. I put the packs together. I organize the training list. That's my ministry. Baby, do that, and do that to the tens. Because me, with my Pisces ass, I'm not going to remember to handle that spreadsheet. And I do what I do at my capacity. It takes all of us. So I will close with saying, don't let anyone tell you your advocacy is invalid. Think about how you show up. Do that at the highest level you can, and make sure the intention is to support who you want to be a support to. And I feel like if those three things happen, and you're also listening to those you want to serve. I think I said it earlier. Don't walk in a room and say, oh, these people want this, let's give it to them. No. Listen to these folks you want to be in service to. But I feel like if you keep those things in play, you'll always be all right, even in the times that you mess up. Because having all those things in line doesn't mean that you may not mess up. And I've heard a lot of white folks talk about a fear of engaging in advocacy because they don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be labeled a racist. I don't want to. It takes a lot of privilege to allow your fear to prevent you from showing up the way you need to show up. Because those who are most marginalized don't have the space to say, I'm too afraid to do it. They don't have a choice because that's the only way it'll get done. So I want to affirm fears. I want to affirm the concerns, but also continue to challenge folks to show up. Because we are Nebraska, we can see critical change in our lifetimes. This isn't New York. This isn't LA. This is Omaha, Nebraska. This is Nebraska in general. We've talked about the prison system. Our system is like about at 5,700 folks. 5,700 people are in our entire system. Rikers Island, the county jail in LA, holds 9,000 people in the jail in New York. So I believe we can address these issues, but we're going to have to keep going the way we have been. And also I think that's going to create the type of community where you're seeing things like this. 2 years ago, would people be having complete series on advocacy efforts, investing finances and staff time in this? Right? I've been a musician my entire life. I came into this work thinking that music was how I was going to change the world, right? I've been working with Lick and Calling and systems like that for years. These conversations are happening because people are saying we care, and we know this is essential for us to have the sort of society we want to have. And I don't think we would have these conversations if we wouldn't have lost James Scurlock. I don't believe that unless we would have lost George and Breonna and Dominique Fells and Tony McDade and James Scurlock and everyone else that's in that litany of people who were taken from us due to violence, due to racism and supremacy, that we will be sitting here talking now. And for those names that I spoke into the space, I'm grateful. But I also am looking forward to us building more community to where it won't take a loss for us to be activated to create this sort of important change.
Absolutely. We're almost out of time, and I want to give a shout out to the folks who are online. There's a lot of comments that are coming in, a lot of folks sharing their experience with the carceral state, and especially folks shouting out to you, Dominique. You are fierce. Shout out to Andrea Evans, who is listening to us online, who has been with us for a number of weeks. Thank you, Andrea. We love you. Ty, who is a collaborator on this series, has posed a question. I think this could be a good question for us to end with, although it is really a call to action and something that we need to continue doing, is imagining alternatives to the carceral state. But beyond just imagining alternatives, I want to think about those folks who are doing that imaginative work, imagining Black futures, imagining Black trans futures. Tell us what those futures look like.
Oh Lord, I believe that it's in the. I've said this. There's an individual definition of liberation, and I don't think that you can create like that community definition or that community ideal until you feel like you've touched it yourself. But outside of like my theory around community-based liberation, I will say that the dream is just a space where everyone gets up in the morning and feels like whatever they want, they can really truly have. And they really can truly have it. Not given, not dished out. But if I wake up today and I say, I want to run a business and I'm willing to do the work to do that I could access that the same way that you could, Aaron, as a white person. That's the type of society I want to live in, where people, based on their merit, get access to what they deserve to have. It's kind of like, it's that Christmas morning feeling when we don't know what's in the gifts, but we know we have a crap ton of gifts and we're just excited to open them up. I want it to feel like that for every day of our lives. And sometimes we open up the gift, right? And we're like, oh, this is really crappy. I didn't want these socks. Right? So it's not saying that I'm saying we want it to be perfect every day. I'm saying that hope, that spark of possibility is woven into our society overall. That's what that vision looks like for me, especially for Black folks, because we deserve to really be able to feel like hope and possibility are ours to have.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the things I know I struggle with is what does that like look like on the broader community level? But for me, like when I just think about myself personally, I think it's, as much as I like love being on this call talking about advocacy with the two of you, I think it's just like me being able and feeling comfortable to spend just like each night hanging out with my wife when I'm done with work and not feeling like I should be advocating or for something or working on specific issue, because we've kind of got to the point where there's not that urgency that we have to make progress because people are being hurt, people are dying. That's my vision of it, is just like hang out with my wife, something fairly simple, but it would be cool like for us to sit there and me not like feel like, oh, let me check this email to make sure like something crazy didn't happen, that with the skills I have I can try and do something to help with. Like it would be yeah, just to relax.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a beautiful future to imagine. Well, we are 15 seconds away from getting kicked off of our lives. So I just want to say to both of you, thank you so much for everything that you shared tonight. We feel more empowered. Everyone's been shouting that out in the comments. So thank you, and have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, we had a wonderful time. I'm not sure exactly when this will get kicked off, but great show. And we'll be back for more on voter suppression next time. Thank you.